The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is Faith Like My Father.
Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson, and we are today pre-recording episode 239, and I've got John Fela in the studio here with me. John Fela is a dad with a mission based on having a son whom he loves dearly and has given himself to, who has special needs, autism, nonverbal. And John has dedicated his life. He's a man with experience in education and many other areas, including having a master's degree in education, worked with Johnny and Friends and other faith-based organizations focused on providing advice, guidance, and assistance to those fathers who are in this situation with special needs children, and also to the fathers themselves. Welcome to the studio, John.
Thanks, Wade. It's great to be here.
Well, and it's great to have you, given that you've dedicated your life to this purpose. As we always do, we'd like to get to know what the forces were that formed and shaped you, who your parents were, and the situation that you grew up in. So let's just jump right into it and learn a little bit about your background.
Definitely. So I like to describe my childhood and my upbringing on the north side of Chicago as kind of a SNL, Saturday Night Live skit, right? If you've ever seen any of the funny stuff that they've done in the past, like the Bears and all those kind of things, I grew up in a very stereotypical north side of Chicago, blue-collar Catholic household. My father was a truck driver. My mother was a secretary most of her working life. And, you know, every stereotype, every funny pronunciation of a word, food, holidays, whatever it was all very much that. My upbringing was very traditional. I grew up in a family, again, that was very Catholic in the sense that I went to a Catholic school. I had to, go to church every Sunday. Of course, my dad never went to church. And of course, my mom would take me as just kind of, well, this is just what we do. And, dad's over at the bar. And, specifically, my father really influenced my life in a couple of ways. Now, when I say that, I want to stress that my dad, as I also sometimes like to put it, did the best he could. But again, he was a blue-collar guy. He, was not very educated. He was a very intelligent guy. I always considered that he was a guy that had very interesting opinions on things and loved to watch the news and would sometimes watch with me and we'd discuss things. But he was also essentially a functional alcoholic. He went to work every day. And my mother said, well, your dad's not really an alcoholic because he goes to work. Well, then I became an adult and I met many adults that are functional alcoholics that go to work and, So he would drink every day, and then on the weekends he would really drink. And, he was just kind of checked out of his life. He went to work, came home, complained about his day. Maybe we would have some, family time, whatever that looked like around the dinner table. But otherwise, he was hitting the bottle. The interesting thing, though, is this, and this is really kind of a core kind of a story and message that I have when I speak to dads, when I speak to dad groups, and I also speak about this journey of being a special needs parent, which is my father gave me one piece of advice in life. And it was something that I pretty much dismissed, thinking that it was just the ramblings of, my father, who, by the time I became a teenager, I just kind of relegated him to being a drunken fool kind of a thing. But he always told me two words. It was his kind of catchphrase, two words, which were "don't panic." Okay. whatever happens in life, whatever you're facing, whatever's going on, stay calm, take a breath, compose yourself, don't panic. And I just remember thinking to myself how much I hated him, because as I grew up, I started to see other guys with their parents, and specifically with their dads, and they had these different relationships, and dad would take them here and dad would do this with them and teach them this. And I'm like, I had none of that. Right. My dad complained if he had to do something extra a lot of the time. And he just gave me those two words. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? Right. Well, as it turns out, my father actually passed away. He had a series of medical issues, and he passed away relatively young at 62. And my mom is still alive, but is in assisted living with dementia. So as I reflect back on my childhood, I certainly learned a lot of good values. I learned the values of hard work. I learned the value of being committed to your family, and I really do give credit to my parents, both of them in their own unique ways, for giving me what I would refer to as the fortitude to be able to support a child with a severe disability, in terms of my son, Chris, because that has not been an easy road. But it's because of the lessons I learned from them and the way they showed up for family that, there's nothing you don't do for your family. I mean, within reason, certainly, but, you support the people you love. And sometimes that's ugly, and it's not always pretty. And whether it's a medical thing or a issue in school, or whatever we're talking about, you show up and you support the people you care about. So I took that from them, but also that don't panic line that actually played out for me. And I won't use that story right now, but it is a story I like to tell, and it's also in my book that's coming out. Those two words actually provided me with way more perspective later in life than I realized. And what I saw, kind of looking back in hindsight, was my father actually gave me the best advice in the world. I just didn't realize it, because I dismissed him because of the behavior I saw. And it wasn't until these things played out in my life and I said, wow, and also tying them to scripture and faith, it made all the sense to me. So growing up in that environment, and then of course, I met my first wife, my son's mom. She came from a totally different background than I did. She actually came from a relatively affluent family. So it was an interesting kind of road and relationship there. And then certainly with our son being born, I would tell you that I had gone through every up and down in marriage, to the point where it almost ended, and then it didn't, thankfully. But then eventually we did wind up getting divorced. And that was not expected, not something that I wanted, but nonetheless, we remained great parents, great co-parents, still work well together, still support our son. And by the grace of God, I now have an incredible new wife who loves me, loves my son, loves the Lord, and also loves the work I do. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, in terms of those early influences in life.
Awesome. And I want to dig a little bit further into the timeline here going forward, but I want to go back first and just ask a couple of basic questions, because I'm listening to you, and what you're saying is resonating with me in a variety of ways in terms of my own experience and what it means. My circumstances were challenging. There was a period of time for 2 years when I lived in Sweden with my aunt and uncle because of my own parents' divorce, my mother's alcoholism. And it was a very functional family. My uncle worked for the Swedish Railroad, which meant they actually provided basically a place for him to sit and play cards all day, because he was an alcoholic. And with the work he did on the railroad, there was kind of not anything he could do without somehow risking messing something up that would have been serious or material, right? But in the Swedish society, they were very advanced in the sense of knowing that this was a disease, but also perhaps maybe a little bit too accommodating in that he had a job which wasn't a job, and everybody knew it. But it was my aunt that kept the family together. And so I wanted to understand a little bit about that in your family, also to understand you and your focus on fathers, and how perhaps that might have played into your personal aptitude and desire to help both children, your son, but also fathers that you mentioned in the intro that we had before the recording, right? So I'm just curious about the dynamic in your family, what your mother provided, holding everything together, and your own sort of processing of all this, and having gotten through the teenage years, where obviously many teenagers look very negatively on their parents at that point in time, and in your case, you perhaps had reason to. But coming out the other side and then wanting to really help families, both fathers and children, just want to unpack that a little bit more, where that comes from.
So I would begin by saying that I think I learned way more from my father in terms of what not to do. I can vividly remember as a young child thinking about all the things I wish were different, and thinking about all of the things that, you know what, when I become a parent, maybe this is what I'm going to do. All of the things that I wanted my father to do with me, and which had to, the beginning and end of that was, put down the glass, put down the bottle, which he couldn't do. Be intentional, spend time with me. Let's do father son things. And it's not that we didn't have those moments, we just didn't have a lot of them. And what I also saw from my father, and also knowing his background a little bit, was that I think he felt very, very defeated in life. He was someone who, quite honestly, he was, when we would go to family functions and parties or whatever was going on, he was the life of the party. I mean, he was a very social creature. He was great with people. I really do credit him with, the foundations of some of my communication skills, because he could absolutely point out to me the way someone used body language, the way someone said something, and that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, I could see that he was someone that had desires to do something else with his life, or maybe be something else. And he just wound up working a typical, again, 40-hour blue collar kind of a thing, which, to be fair, he was always very proud of it. It's not that he ever said, my job's the worst necessarily, but you could also see that he had given up on life in some respects, because he felt life gave up on him. And so what I saw from that was, what, I don't want to be that, right? I want to be a guy who's present, who's there for his family. Sure, I had my fun in college and in my 20s going out to the bars and that type of thing. But I never wanted to be him, right? And then, in contrast with my mother, my mother, again, being very traditional, very conventional, it was this kind of thing where, yes, my husband drinks every day. My husband is drunk every day. My parents, would fight on a pretty regular basis. Those fights never really got physical, but they almost did. And I definitely saw things, growing up that I literally felt like I have to insert myself into this, because I'm afraid one of them or both of them are going to kill each other. And it was always one of these things where, again, growing up as a kid in the 80s in that culture, you didn't talk about these things. You didn't go to counseling. You didn't go to therapy. It was, okay, just don't say anything if anybody asks you, and all this kind of stuff. And so no one was really being honest with things. But what I saw from my mother, so, again, I mentioned the advice my father gave me. I think what I really learned from my mother was, again, how to show up for the people you care about. One story I'll tell is I mentioned that my father had a series of medical issues. And so one thing that happened, and some of these things, I think all of these things are related to his alcoholism, maybe not directly, but definitely indirectly. But he developed a series of hemorrhages in his brain back when I was probably in, let's say, fourth or fifth grade. It didn't result in him having an aneurysm, but what it meant was that he was having nosebleeds that were uncontrollable. So the blood was just kind of flowing and there was no stopping it. And so he would go to the emergency room. They would do a variety of treatments. Nothing worked. And then it got to the point where he wasn't working and he was at home. And I'm not kidding when I tell you that there would be waste paper baskets full of bloody tissues and, rags and, whatever he was using to just kind of keep the blood from coming out. So one night, it was a school night, it was during the week. It got to the point where we were up, or my mom was up with him. It was already probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and he was almost kind of losing consciousness. He was almost going into a comatose state. So my mom says, we have to get him to the hospital. Let's pile into the car. We get in the car. The hospital that his doctor was at was probably, if you're driving the speed limit, it might be a half an hour drive. If you're not driving the speed limit, maybe 15 minutes. And that was the case. We were on pretty much empty streets in the middle of the city that night. My mom is driving. I'm in the back seat with my father. My father is barely awake. And all I could remember my mom saying was, keep him awake, keep talking to him, just don't let him fall asleep. And I just remember in that moment how composed my mother was. This was a moment that maybe could have meant my father going to the hospital and not coming home, literally. And she was composed. She wasn't crying. She was just calm. And one thing that I learned later in life, it's interesting because I certainly did a lot of therapy. I did therapy in previous marriage. I did therapy on my own. I did therapy with my ex-wife. But one of the things that I learned is that when you grow up in a house like that, when you grow up in an alcoholic home where there's literally trauma every day, you can handle like really serious, hard situations, emergency crises. You can handle like nothing, because you've been immersed in that since you were a child. So, my son having severe autism, taking him to the hospital middle of the night because he had a fever, or, at one point he eventually had a seizure disorder and he had 3 seizures in one day. We had to take him to the hospital and call the paramedics. Those kind of things. It's like, I don't want them. I don't want them for him. I don't want him for me or anybody I care about. But you know what? I've kind of been there, done that. And so it's funny because I remember one counselor told me, major crises for you are like nothing. Little things might get to you, little things might annoy you, kind of thing, but the big stuff, you got that. Because again, I was immersed and steeped in that trauma from a very young age. But I also had parents who I very clearly and vividly remember were able to step into it with a calmness, with a grace, with a sense of, okay, this is what we have to do. We're going to do this. It's going to be fine. And in most cases it was, not always, but in most cases. And so I think to myself, as much as my mother was a very eccentric woman, someone who could be very controlling, at the same time, she is someone who I like to think taught me what it meant to love the people you love and care for them and show up for them and not give up on them. Because, again, I certainly went through my rebellious phase as a teenager, almost got thrown out of high school, all of this stuff with my grades and et cetera. She was upset. She was disappointed, but you know what? She always supported me. And she would do that personally and at school and everything. You don't give up on the people you love. That is ultimately what I got from her, and really from both of them. So as hard as the lessons were, they still really had a lot of value.
Sorry, I was on mute. What's coming to me is the practical aspect of that serenity prayer, right? The things that we can control and the things that we can't, and even the sort of frustration about little things. I think of myself, and I have the same thing, right? I mean, alcoholic mother, was in an orphanage, chaos all around me, and living in a tent as a senior in high school in Alaska, and many times saying, "Yeah, I can get through this. It's not the tent, right? It's not as bad as the tent." But then getting really irritated about little things because they're preventable, right? Predictable, preventable. So it's that balance of the things that you can control and the things that you can't. Does that play into it at all in terms of your experience and how you approach life?
Yeah, I think I've learned, certainly through all of those early experiences with my family, but also as I've been on my faith journey, because I came to my Christian faith as an adult. I was saved as an adult, and it was really through probably the worst season of life. As bad as what I just described to you, I would still say my worst season of life was right before I came to Christ. And I think there are reasons for that, certainly. But what I've seen is that there are a number of things I've experienced that I think would allow me to say, you know what, you got to give me a break. You got to give me grace. Do you know what I've been through? And again, I think that's all a relative thing because, for example, my son has a severe disability, but I know I have plenty of friends who have kids that have far worse stuff going on and life threatening and, hospital visits, like you wouldn't believe. So I don't like to compare, but I think looking at the experiences I had from childhood, looking at the experiences I've had raising my son with a disability, looking at all of the things that eventually brought me to Jesus, I say, you know what? We're good, because at the end of the day, there are still things that frustrate me. There are still things I don't understand. There are still things I'm like, why did that thing that happened 10 years ago, like, why did that have to happen? But I see that there's a plan and there's a purpose, and ultimately, as much as I maybe wish I had a different childhood, I'm grateful for the gifts it gave me, because again, it gave me this fortitude and this peace. Say, you know what, you're never going to get to a place, and I think I came to this realization years ago. You're never going to get to a place where everything is going right or everything is perfect. That's not what this whole living on planet Earth thing is about. This is about you learning to grow in your faith, grow in, on your faith walk and journey, grow as a person, grow as a parent, grow as a friend, grow as a spouse, right? These things are meant to grow us. And so without them, I absolutely wouldn't be the person I am today. And what I also say is, when people say, well, don't you ever wish your son didn't have a disability? Which I mean, the knee-jerk reaction is, well, sure, of course. But I look at all of the gifts my son's disability has meant for me. Now, I don't like to make it about me, because at the end of the day, my son still has a disability, and, that's the primary focus. But without my son's disability, I wouldn't be called to do the work I do. I wouldn't have a lot of the experiences that I have had. I wouldn't have made so many wonderful relationships and friendships and connections. And so in many ways, my journey has kind of shaped me to be the person to step into this. And, even with all the challenges, they're just what made me. Like, I don't have a message or a platform unless I've actually gone through all of these things and come out the other end and said, you know what? I don't have it all figured out. I don't have all the answers. You know what? I never will. But I do know this. I know there's a God who loves me. I know there's a God who has a plan for me. And I know that I have been led on a path. And sometimes, most times, the hardest thing to do is to just trust him. It is that difficult. It is probably the hardest thing we can do, especially as Christians. But I think it's something that we're ultimately called to do, to say, you know what, you have a plan. I have seen evidence of your goodness in my life. And if I'm not going to have faith in you now, then when will I have it? Right. So I think all of those things have shaped me. And at the end of the day, I'm still grateful for them.
Well, that's a great pause point as we segue into the next commercial break. I believe we'll have a video here coming up that explores a little bit about you. Also, the book that you've written, which is at the title here, Faith Like My Father, right? And this focus that you've had in the work that you've done. So when we come back after that video, we'll dive a little bit more into what that work is and how this faith journey plays into all that. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of John Fela here on Created in the Image of God.
What does it take to stay grounded when life feels uncertain? When responsibilities grow, pressure builds, and nothing goes as planned. This book explores what it means to navigate real life, marriage, fatherhood, and raising a child with special needs, with clarity, resilience, and faith. At its core, it's a story about steadying yourself in the moments that matter most and learning how to move forward without losing your footing. Faith Like My Father, available now on Amazon.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. I'm here with John Fela. We've just explored his background and how the difficulties and challenges, even as a child and in his own family, and then with his son who is autistic and has is nonverbal, and he's 17. And there have been many, many challenges along the way. But as we've seen from John, the positive view of faith gives a perspective in which all of this has a purpose. Let's start there, the purpose and how you're applying it in your work as an adult and the calling that you have. I saw you give a presentation, I believe it was a commencement address, that was just so powerful, and I wanted to have you on the show to express some of that clarity and vision that you have in our purpose, speaking to those commencement students. My daughter's going into college, and I would hope that she's getting some of that instruction as she moves into that phase of her life. By the way, she is going into occupational therapy because she works with special needs kids in her has I think for several years now in her high school in the gym class. So there's an integration approach that's being taken that was certainly not available when I was in junior high and high school. But anyway, back over to you to unpack some of this.
Yeah, so I will very truthfully say that if I did not have a child with a disability, I probably wouldn't be doing any of this, right? It was just never in my wheelhouse. Certainly, I was around kids and folks with not as much when I was younger, and for whatever reason, but certainly as I was an adult and also went into education, starting about 20 years ago, certainly we're in those environments in the classroom and had kids with IEPs and all this type of thing. But it was never something that I really wanted to, extend myself into or saw that I had any gifting or desire to work with. But, where it's kind of started for me was when my son was about 5 years old. So I'm going back to like 2012. He's actually 18 now, by the way. But so I had an experience actually, and it's something that I talk about in my presentations at conferences, and there are videos of it and things. And it's a story I call A Tale of Two Parking Lots, and it involves two parking lots. And this took place in the summer of 2012. This is before I came to faith in Jesus. And this was also during this period that I hinted at previously, where it was literally the worst season of life. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong. I had a job loss. We were suffering financially. Our marriage was hanging by a thread. We almost lost our house. We didn't know where we were going to place our son because of his needs, and nothing was working. And it was just a mess. So we attended, at the time, we attended a Unitarian church, which is not a Christian denomination. Some might think it is. It's not. But we were attending because we were kind of seeking at that time, and they had a men's group that would meet on Friday nights. And I was going to this men's group, but I was there early this one night. So I sat in my car and I called a couple of my oldest friends. They knew a little bit about what was going on, but they didn't know everything. So I unpack all of this for them. And they're on the phone with me and they're like, "Man, we love you, but we don't know what to say. This is just kind of over our heads, beyond our pay grade." In fact, I had one friend tell me, "What, if it were me, I'd walk." And I'm like, "Well, I can't do that, right?" And then I go into this meeting with all these guys who are mostly like 20 years my senior. And I'm sitting there and, we do kind of this go around the circle, what's going on and all that. And I share this. And again, they knew some things, not all. And here I'm thinking, wow, most of these guys are like 20 years my senior, right? I'm in my late 30s at the time. These guys are 50, 60s, 70s. Oh, they got some advice. They got some wisdom for me. I get done sharing and it's stunned silence. It's just nothing. And then after about maybe a minute, the group leader chimes in and says, "Wow, that's really tough. But what you need to hear is that it's going to be okay." Now, here's the thing. Do I know now, especially as a person of faith, it's going to be okay? Yes. But that's not what I needed to hear in that moment. In the middle of crisis, that's the last thing someone wants to hear. It's going to be okay. Yeah, shrug it off. Don't worry about it. I wanted someone to come walk alongside me. "Hey, man, I don't understand what you're going through, but what do you need? Do you need to talk? Can I take you out for a coffee or a beer? Whatever. Let me be intentional with you in terms of having a relationship." I had none of that. So I learned the hard way that I had no community. So a lot of my desire in terms of my advocacy, which developed, the seed of it was really that experience, realizing I had no community, I had family, I had friends, but I had no one that understood my journey specifically as a special needs parent. So a lot of my early...
I want to quickly pause you there as well, because the subtitle of this show, Creating the Image of God, is building vibrant communities. And of course, this is a virtual show, right? We don't have a church per se, but we are connecting with people and connecting people. What I want to explore, without in any way being negative or critical of that particular, little church or that broad church, the Unitarian Church or movement. You said it's not a denomination. I think I understand what you mean. What is it about it, without again getting critical, what is it about it that you didn't have community there?
So it's interesting because, my experience of Christianity prior to that was really Catholicism, right? I didn't have another experience of it. And I was very much into the new age, meditation and chakras and all that kind of stuff. And so was my wife, who was actually raised Jewish, by the way. And so, but we didn't really have a community. And so we originally joined. One of the reasons we joined was to find community. And we met some nice people and nice families. The difference, though, was, and this really kind of unfolded for me after we had been there about a year. And again, right about this time I'm describing, where I saw that, okay, there are people that are showing up here, and I jokingly, even in my book, I refer to it as church for atheists, because you can literally be an atheist and be there because it's just about some place to go and engage on some level. And they had some nice programs and music and whatever, and they would have a Christmas service and a whatever Easter service. But again, it was very surface. It was very superficial. And what I saw was there were a lot of people who were just kind of there, who very easily could have been at a Starbucks or some other restaurant or some other place, just hanging out and just talking smack about this, that, or the other, as opposed to, okay, the experience I had just a few weeks later when I attended a men's Bible study at the church of one of my ex-wife's friends. So my ex-wife had a co-worker at her school. She was also a teacher who was basically trying to testify to her because we were going through all of this, and was really just speaking to her about Jesus and all of that. And my wife finally said, well, does your church have a men's group? Sure, here's the information. I went because I'm like, look, at this point, I'll try anything. You want me to go there, I'll go there. Now, again, I had a very stereotypical view of, oh, this is an evangelical church. These guys are going to be hitting me over the head with Bibles or something. I don't know what's going to happen. I went in there, and I can tell you that it was a total 180 from what I experienced with these other guys, where these other guys were just stone cold silent. I don't know what to say. These guys actually asked questions. Now it's not like they spent the whole time talking about me. They did their study, they did their sharing, a little bit of introductions. But here's what really hit me. At the end of the night, there was a guy, I still remember his name was Matt. And as they closed in prayer, Matt prayed for me specifically. Now, even though I had not accepted Christ yet, I still knew the power of that. I knew what it meant. I could feel it, in my being. And I'm like, wow, you guys just met me, but you're praying for me. And that is something that never happened at that other church. And again, because prayer can mean a lot of things, even to people that are not Christians, right? And again, not saying that, you necessarily put your stock in it, but it's still the intention of, let me at least do this for you. Let me pray for you just because it'll maybe bring some peace to your soul. That never happened at the Unitarian Church. But here I had a true experience of what it meant for brothers in Christ to come around me and pray for me and say, you know what, we do want to know about you. And then even after the meeting, as we were chit-chatting, asking questions, hey, so tell me about you and what's going on, and do you guys think you want to try the church? And I'm just like, man, you guys just met me and you're treating me better than people I've known for a while, So that to me right there was the early seed of understanding the need and the value for community with men, certainly, but then also as I started to work with dads of special needs, and I speak about this in some of my presentations, the tools that I learned from those men, from those men's groups, from those early men's groups, from whether it was a Bible study or a men's group at the church, and we would do events and we would host fundraisers and whatever the camaraderie was. But I got so much from those experiences that I could then translate and transpose over to my experiences working with dads, doing support groups for dads of special needs, working with those type of organizations, reaching out and kind of ministering to guys in a situation just like mine. All of those experiences proved valuable. But again, the biggest difference was you saw the intentionality of the guy saying, you matter, we care about you, can we pray for you, how can we help you, right? And again, that was a very stark difference, and it was really a total night and day thing.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm glad I asked the question. I'm reflecting on this group that my wife and I have been going to for 2.5 years. It's actually in a nursing home. And there's a small group of mostly women who wanted a spiritual community in that, and it's interdenominational and it's interfaith. There have been people there who are not Christian, Hindu, and whatever. But it has that same thing of people who care and who are there and there every week. And there's one woman in particular who really is the one who wanted this and asked for it. She's from the Bahamas. And that's what I think of when I heard you about Matt praying. She does that, right? And she will remember and she will pray for the people. And we do that. We go around and we find out, what can we pray for? And those prayers are powerful and they're moving. But it's also just knowing that people are putting in that being present, as you call it. So thank you for sharing that. So how do you then relate that to the work that you've done out in the community and the speeches that you've given, the presentations that you've given, and how do you translate that power that you experienced there and received into going out into the broader community and helping fathers and children?
So really my motivation, it certainly comes from the experiences that I've had and that I've shared. But here's the other unfortunate thing. I really see, and this is, I think, especially specific to the disability community, special needs families and parents. There are a lot of resources for moms. And that's great, right? A lot of the resources, whether it's books or things you find online, support groups, whatever it is, tend to be focused on moms. That's great. We love our moms. We need our moms, right? But meant to usually, in my experience, are under-resourced and underserved and overlooked, quite honestly, because, and I think there are several reasons for that. On the one hand, you have a very high divorce rate. I mean, the divorce rate is already high in this country. And again, I hate quoting numbers because I always hear something different all the time. But let's say the divorce rate is like, I think the last quote I saw was it's either like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. It's exponentially higher for families of disability. In fact, at one point I had heard it could be as high as 80%, right, within the first 5 years of, let's say, a child's diagnosis. So the issue you have is, and I very much experienced this in my marriage to my son's mom, where, when I was kind of navigating this very challenging season of life, one of the questions that I also had to answer, besides this issue of finding community, one of the questions I had to answer for myself was, who was I? Because in many families like mine, the mom, the wife is the one that kind of manages things, manages the household, manages the calendar. This is when the kid has to go to therapy. This is when they see this doctor. This is when they see this specialist. This is when we're doing this. And that's fine. And a lot of families run that way and no problem, even with typical kids, obviously. But in my case, my ex-wife was very type A, kind of controlling and handled it. And I didn't need to put my hands on it. I just, when you need to pick him up here and take him here and whatever. Okay, great, no problem. And then, if she was busy during the week or on weekends, I'd happily take him. We'd go play or go wherever we're going and have a good time. But frequently what you see is that men kind of get lost in the shuffle there, because it's, okay, what do I do? What value do I bring to the marriage? And so in my case, for example, I was never the breadwinner in our family. My ex-wife, my son's mom, always made more money. We were both teachers, but she just always made more. So I wasn't the kind of guy, like some other dads I know, who could just write a blank check and say, well, they need XYZ therapy. Let's write the check, da, da, da. I'm just going to work, and I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to throw myself in my work. We're going to pay for all these things and whatever. But then most men, most dads get checked out. They get checked out of the marriage, checked out of the relationship with the child, and checked out of the relationship with the wife. So for me, the focus is bringing to light the needs of dads, the struggles that dads have as men that are specific to us as dads and men. Okay. And sometimes we can get even more specific, talking about relationships with a men and dads and a male child as opposed to a daughter. But, at the end of the day, this really comes down to men being able to have access to a lot of the same resources that exist for moms, support groups, being connected to, dads individually, whether that's in their literal community close by or on a bigger scale nationally. And I work with a lot of dads around the country and organizations where support groups meet virtually. And that's just kind of our world now, right? There are a lot of virtual support groups. Even if somebody's close by, sometimes that's what works, or otherwise you try to meet in person. I have a couple that meet in person that I've been involved with for several years. So the message and the mission is trying to get dads to be aware of what their own needs are, and the fact that, yes, you need a community. You need at least one guy, because it's so hard for men especially to admit, my child has issues, or my son especially will never do these things, or I'll never do these things with my son that I always dreamed of, whatever. Okay, we all have that. But at the end of the day, this is kind of what we're dealing with, what we're coping with. Who do you have that you can actually talk to and have these conversations? Maybe you're not comfortable having them with your spouse, or maybe you're not comfortable with having all the conversations. Who do you have? Do you have at least one person? I'm like, some guys don't want a big group dynamic. They don't want to meet a bunch of strange guys and start unpacking their life. That's fine. Start with one. Do you have one? Right. And so that for me has really been the motivation of my work is, I want to put a lens on parents of disability in the greater context. And certainly my work with an organization like Johnny and Friends was part of that, in terms of bringing an awareness in the greater sense, in the greater culture, to families of disability and their needs and how we want to be accepted, but then specifically the way that men and dads roles play out, and the tools and the support they need. And really, I know guys that are doing remarkable things out there, that run organizations, and that's not anything that, I'm even coming close to. But the fact is that as intentionally as I can get with someone, and I say this all the time, if you have no one to talk to, you can talk to me. That's fine. I'll always make time for you. I may wind up passing you along to someone else who I think, hey, you know what, you really want to meet this person too. But I have no problem talking to any guy, because I know what that is. I've been there. I know what it's like to not have anybody. And if I could do that for at least one other guy, one other dad, then, my work has mattered.
Well, this whole aspect of marriage and the family, I mentioned, I think to you, I don't think I mentioned it here on air, that there's this new series I've drafted on my Substack around Hebrews 11. But I've also taken this verse. It's actually the title of my second book, Hardness of the Heart, where the Pharisees try to trap Jesus around the issue of divorce, right? Moses said you could get divorced for all these reasons. What do you say? And they're trying to trap him. And he says, from the beginning, it was not so, right? God allowed it. Moses allowed it, he says, because of the hardness of your heart. So it was an accommodation to deal with the fact that you weren't fulfilling that original purpose. You weren't holding it together. And that's a wonderful accommodation, because divorce has happened. I've been through one. But the point, the goal is to have that bond, that marriage in the family, where men can be fully present for their spouse, but also their children. So reflect on that for a moment, given what you had as a child, given that the mother of your son, there ended up a divorce, and what you have now. Comment for a moment on that. Fulfilling the needs of men in this situation is also enabling them to be participating in the family unit in that sense. And even if it's just being connected with their children, even if this high divorce rate for families where disability is a factor, we haven't figured that out, but still you're helping with that involvement so that the men don't check out, so that they can find a role, so that wherever this chicken and egg situation is coming from, of men they're not being resources for men, maybe because men don't want those resources or don't know what to do with, you know what I mean? Just focus on that for a moment, if you would, because I'm just loving listening to you and your experience and how you approach all this.
So if you were to take my parents' marriage, and if you were to take my marriage to my first wife, I would say they were totally in contrast to each other. What I saw in my parents' marriage were two people that fought every day, two people that were clearly not happy with their station in life and their situation. I remember, and I still have it kind of burned in my brain. There was one morning when I was a young kid, and I think it was even like a Sunday morning, and my parents were having a fight. And I remember my mom screaming at my dad in tears about how he was drunk every day. And she literally was like running back and forth to the bedroom, and I could hear her crying. Like it just echoed through the house. And my father wasn't drinking. He was, it was early in the morning. He was sober. He was clear-headed, and he's like, just leave your mom alone, give her some space whenever she's upset. But what's interesting is that despite all of that, they stayed together. And they also supported each other through some very, very tough times. And so on the one hand, we might see that through the lens of today, and maybe even the lens of back then, because I knew even then that there was something not right here. This was not healthy. And we would probably say today, there's no way that a woman would stay in that, or ideally, in most cases, they wouldn't. They would just leave, or they would demand that the husband, goes, through some kind of a recovery thing with the alcohol. Maybe it's, and again, when we thought of abuse in that time, abuse was literally physical abuse. Like you were getting your clock cleaned by your spouse or your parent. And even then, because like I got the belt from my dad, and I didn't go crying to anybody about it and that type of thing. So again, this was all just kind of assumed as this is just how it is. Compare that to my marriage to my first wife. Okay. We didn't really have any of that. Did we have a few fights? Yeah. Nothing anywhere near the scale of my parents. But at the same time, certainly that's not who I was. I knew I wasn't my father. My ex was someone in terms of her family. She grew up in a household where the dad was emotionally checked out. He did very well for himself. He made a lot of money and kept the family very, very well taken care of. But she often said, like, my mom and my dad just, they make it look good in public, but she's like, I don't know that they ever really loved each other. Okay. So in my marriage to her, what I saw was someone who, especially in the early years, wanted a lot of attention, wanted a lot of affection, and I had no problem giving it to her. But she was also someone who basically, we all kind of make these generic claims about, well, of course, the wife is in charge, and my wife makes all the decisions, kind of thing, whatever. But in her case, it very much had to be that. And so again, playing into what happened with our son, it was, okay, well, this is what we're doing. I'm going to let you know what we're doing, but you really don't have a say in it. And then couple that with the fact that my mother-in-law, her mom, who was loved my son, she's passed since, but loved my son, was very generous in a variety of ways, was always present, but she also had opinions. So of course my wife listened to her opinions, and then of course between the two of them they made decisions, and I'm like, okay, great. So the issue there is I saw a marriage in terms of my parents that clearly didn't work, because I had a father who was checked out and drank all the time and was angry and mad, and I had a mom who just lost kind of faith and belief in him. But then likewise, I was in a marriage with my spouse, and I was not an alcoholic. And in fact, my ex-wife really didn't drink much either. We drank a little socially, but I mean, that was about it. And we were okay with that. But what I did see was that the aspects of imbalance in the marriage, where I lost my own sense of self-worth and value. And she was really just kind of concerned with the fact that everything was kind of her way, and wanted the best for our son, and legitimately. She's an incredible mom, still is, and we co-parent very well together to this day. But what I saw was I wasn't an alcoholic. I wasn't checked out of my family, but I also wasn't allowed to be fully invested in my family either, because my wife said I'm the decision maker. And so what I normally say, and this is, you know, in my marriage to my current wife, who is an incredible woman of God and loves my son and loves the work I do and loves, you know, going to all the places that I go to. But what I see here is the importance of having a godly marriage. Now, I know how, you know, some folks might hear that and say, you know, okay, you know, whatever, that's maybe a throwaway line that we all use, have a godly marriage. Well, what does that even mean? But what I learned was this. I grew up in a family that, you know, although they were Catholic, you know, nobody was reading the Bible by the fire at night. Nobody was, you know, saying prayers. Nobody was doing this, that, or the other. And then I went into a marriage where, while I married someone who was a great mom, very well put together, you know, on the surface was someone that, you know, anybody would want to be married to, but I lost myself. And so the importance of having Jesus in the middle of your marriage cannot be overstated. Because even though I came to faith in my first marriage, and my ex-wife did too, and I won't go totally into the story now, but, you know, my ex decided she didn't love me anymore, and she was actually the one who just one day just up and said, I want a divorce. And we weren't having any problems, and I don't have a drinking problem or a gambling problem, and I'm not cheating. It's just I don't love you anymore. Okay. I know that she's also walked away from the faith. I don't really know what she's doing, but I know she's not a believer. So in my current marriage, I've seen the value of keeping Jesus in the middle, having times together when we pray, never missing, like we pray at every meal. When we have to make decisions, we pray. We're both very involved in our church, which is a very small community church, but everybody knows each other and is very supportive of each other. And because a lot of the work that I do in the disability world has a faith component to it, it is something that we know is at our heart in terms of serving the Lord and what He has gifted us to do. So what I would tell people is this: don't dismiss this idea of keeping Jesus in the middle of your marriage. It is that important, because at the end of the day, if your focus is on Jesus, you're going to be a lot more selfless in your marriage. You are going to respect your partner a lot more and realize that, listen, marriage is, look, we both complement each other. There are things my wife is great at, I'm not, and vice versa. That's fine. At the end of the day, though, I know that I am the head of the household, that I am the final decision maker, but I respect her totally. We discuss everything, we bring it before God, and we say, okay, what are we going to do? That to me is an ideal marriage. And again, look, I also want to be clear. You could probably find marriages that present holier than ours, right? You know, we probably could pray more. We probably could read the Bible more. We probably could do a lot of things more. But we know where our strength and our foundation is and where that comes from. And as long as you remember that, then a lot of these things, you know, I'm not saying magically, I'm not saying it's an overnight, whatever, everything changed overnight, because even when I came to faith, it's not like my life totally changed overnight, but I was changed because He was there and I knew it. So likewise, you can have a marriage that looks like shambles on the outside. It could look perfect on the outside. But what is in your heart and what is in between both of your hearts, if Jesus is not there, you're going to have trouble. And that's the best way that I can put it.
Mute again. So thank you so much. This particular segment has gone a little long. I want to add one follow-on question, and then we'll go to a quick commercial break and come back with a short wrap-up. And that follow-on question is due to some members of the audience who will take exception, perhaps even recoil in horror at the whole idea of husband being the head of the wife. So I want to bring in a verse which I know you know and which I know you're practicing based on what I've heard, which is Paul's statement. Sure, the husband is the head of the wife, as Jesus is the head of the church, who loved it and gave himself for it, right? So Paul flips the script on that whole thing by saying, this is how you lead. This is how you are the head. You are willing to be Christ-like in your willingness to completely pick up that cross and sacrifice yourself, your desire, your ways, in service to that spouse. So I want to just give you the opportunity to sort of unpack that for those who might have recoiled in horror at that statement.
No, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, because that really was my intention there. Because, to be totally fair, that was even something that even when I came to faith, I kind of struggled with a little bit, because I'm like, okay, I don't need to be the boss. I'm not looking to be the boss, but I am looking to be the servant leader. Right. And I think that's the point here. I am looking to lead by example. I am looking to lead in the way Jesus led, which is, you know what, I'm going to get down and wash your feet, because you know what, that's what a true servant leader is. I'm going to give of myself. And so at the end of the day, the difference is that, right, when Paul makes that comparison, sure, as the head of the household, like Christ is the head of the church. So in that sense, it's okay, honey, we have to make this big decision. Well, you know what? We're both going to talk about it. We're both going to pray about it. And you know what? At the end of the day, honey, I trust if this is the way you want to go, we'll go that way. Great. But that doesn't mean that my wife doesn't share in all of that responsibility, because she does, because she has to. Right. And that is God's purpose for marriage, for sure.
Thank you. We'll be right back to wrap this up. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of John Fela.
Every child deserves a place where they feel seen, safe, and supported. Those who guide children also carry the responsibility to protect them. Written by 2 legal experts with over 60 years of experience, this essential resource helps organizations build strong child protection policies, recognize risks, train the right people, and respond when it matters most. From schools to churches to mentoring programs, this is a blueprint for real protection, made practical, sustainable, and clear. Protecting other people's children. A powerful tool for those who choose to care. Available now at Amazon.
Well, welcome back. We had 2 rather longish segments because they were so packed, and I just loved just listening to John explain how he has turned his life's experiences into a path for rich spiritual growth, and very articulately able to express how other people in similar challenges or different challenges, can learn from those experiences. So John, what's next for you briefly, and what are the final words you'd like to leave for the audience tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
this morning, actually, this is pre-recorded for a morning show. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Well, as we are recording this, we are actually 1 day away from my book being released. So again, as you mentioned, my book is called Faith Like My Father. It is really my memoir, where I really unpack a lot of the things you've just heard, but certainly in more detail. And again, really kind of connecting the journey that God has put me on, from being in this kind of chaotic alcoholic family, through my first marriage, raising my son, the trauma of divorce and going through co-parenting, and ultimately finding love again, but also with this theme of don't panic, really threaded through. And there's some great anecdotes and stories that I didn't share here, but again, that's why you got to get the book. So that book is going to be available on every platform, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Billion, you name it. You can find it anywhere, retail, and certainly online, and hopefully some brick and mortar as well. And then I actually have a second book that I'm contributing to. So this one is a little bit more, it's not faith focused, a little more disability focused. But there's a wonderful woman by the name of Temple Grandin, who is a huge name in the autism world as an advocate. I have a friend, Stephanie Holmes, down in the Atlanta area, who is a Christian marriage counselor and is doing a lot of work specifically in the field of neurodiversity in couples and families. She partnered with her to write a book, and I actually got to contribute to that. That book will be coming out in June. don't ask me for the life of me. I don't remember the title of it because it's changed a few times. But if you follow me on social media and on my website, you'll see it. And that book is actually written for educators and for therapists to kind of give them a first-person perspective of what it's like to raise someone with a disability or to be a person of disability yourself. So it's great perspective there. So I'm excited about those coming out as well. I will be speaking at some conferences, certainly around the country as well during the spring. It's a busy season for that. So I do encourage you that if you are interested in the message you've heard, or especially if you take advantage of reading my book and you would like me to come speak to either your church group, parent group, small group, if you have a disability ministry, I work with tons of disability ministries, certainly in the Midwest, but also all over the country. And I actually speak at those conferences and events as well. So please reach out to me through my website or through my social media. My website, of course, is just myname.com, johnfella.com, or you can plug me into the Google machine, as I like to say, and I'm on all the social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. You can find me there. And again, find out the things I'm doing, where I will be, but also too, if you enjoyed interviews like this, I have tons more content out there and lots of hours of it. So I hope you'll take advantage.
Well, and I hope you will check out some of those presentations because John is a very dynamic speaker, like I mentioned at that commencement address, packs a lot in there. So it's johnfela.com.
That's correct.
And John, what a pleasure. I do hope to have you back. We can talk about that once that second book is out. But Faith Like My Father will be out by the time this airs. And that's exciting. I can't wait to take a look at that book. For everyone else, remember one thing: you are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. And stay tuned for another couple of minutes. The sneak peek of next week's show is coming right up. We'll see you there. Welcome to the studio, Steve.
Hey, Wade. Thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
Share a little bit what it was like growing up, Steve.
Yeah, well, it started off with having that less than feeling that we're all born into from Adam and Eve, right? And I just had some parents that just added to that trauma, or had a mother that left me at the age of 4. Parents divorced and she took off, and I never saw her or knew of her until I was about 18 years old.
You're fully back in the saddle of ministry, but in a new and completely different way. Where are you growing next?
And now is to help people get unstuck from healthy habits.
Healthy habits that are performative, not transformative, could also be a problem. That's what I thought. But anyway,
that's great. I might have to steal that. Created a 12-step recovery program based on your identity in Jesus Christ. It's a community that's online, because nothing's more important than community. But when you say 12-step to people, they think of those people, drug addicts and alcoholics. So my passion is to help people just get unstuck from religion, get unstuck from unhealthy habits, whether it's anger or depression or codependency or anxiety, any of these things. That's the passion now, and that's what I'm living out today, creating different avenues for people to come in, to be invited into community, to just see the love of Jesus transform people.